So I am delighted to be here with Mayor Zoppo-Sassu as our guest. Just a couple of words before we begin. This event, as you might know, is sponsored by the Civic Engagement Institute. We have a mission here on campus to make our students here more civically active in their classroom, beyond their classrooms, and in the community. And one of those communities is Bristol. And every semester we get more than 600 students from Bristol attending Tunxis, which is, I believe, the second highest. Anyone? How many from Bristol here? A few of you. So we know how important Bristol is as a city in need, as are most cities in this state, in this country. But that is why we were able to get the mayor. We wanted to have her here to offer some words of wisdom to our young people and how they can become more civically connected to the community at large. Now, the Civic Engagement Institute relies on the devotion of faculty and staff here to make it work. And we've had some great participants and supporters, students and faculty, and staff, administrators. It's really a group effort. We are less than a year old, but we've made great strides already. We have established a certificate program that's going to be approved, I hope, within a couple of months by the Tunxis governance structure. If you're interested in the certificate, please come see me. You can get started on that as early as the fall. One of those great supporters of the Civic Engagement Institute is President Lambella. He has offered us not only his powerful words of support, but also his resources. And literally, I sent him an email requesting something, and that very day he gets back to me with good news about how he can assist. Whenever I ask him for help, he says, "How do we get it done?" And I appreciate that a lot. So with that, I want to turn it over to President Lambella, who will then introduce the mayor.
Good morning, everyone. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have our Bristol mayor with us. And I want to give you a little background about the mayor. Mayor Ellen, and I want to say,
nobody says it right.
no one says it right?
The coolest name of all mayors.
I'm trying. Good stuff. First woman ever to be elected and serve as mayor in Bristol. She's been involved for many years in Bristol politics, and prior to becoming mayor, she served on the Bristol City Council. She recently formed a mayor's youth council made up of 10 and 18-year-olds to get young people more connected to their local government. She became interested in politics very young when she attended city meetings with her father, who served on the Bristol Finance. She earned her undergraduate degree in political science from Providence College in 1990 and her master's in public administration from the University of Connecticut in 1992. She worked as development director at the Boys and Girls Club and Family Center from 2007 to 2011 and at the New Britain Chamber of Commerce from 1995 to 2007. She currently serves as a part-time director of development and grants for the Bristol Historical Society, where she's worked to bring in over $1 million, I'm told, in the last 12 years to restore and renovate the city's first high school as a cultural arts hub. Truly an individual who has been engaged in civic duties since a very young age. And so I'm thrilled to hear and honored to be able to introduce the mayor to talk with our students, to talk with our community about getting involved in civic engagement and also in our community. So with that, I'm gonna hand over the podium to our mayor.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. When talking about what I was going to say today with some of the people that I run ideas by, it really became clear that there's really no set script for talking about youth involvement because there's so many different angles to it. And especially with what's happened in the past several weeks, I think that basically what it comes down to is that right now, the opening sentence that I'm going to say to you is that there is actually 187 reasons why young people should get involved in government. Does anybody know the significance of that number? That is the number of school shootings that have actually taken place in our country since Sandy Hook in 2012. And I'm not sure about you, but for me, that is a number that is absolutely just something that I can't live with. to think that after such a tragedy that I think touched all of us, especially since it was here in Connecticut, to know that 187 times after that, we had children in schools where they're supposed to be safe, supposed to be learning, with parents happily going about their day, knowing their children are in those classrooms, and then to have to face the horrific situations that ensued. Some of them more tragic than others, but every one of them a violation of the public trust, says to me that our children, especially the ones in Parkland who have refused to allow this issue to go its natural news cycle, are the future. All of those Parkland students will be voters in 2020. And all I can hope is that their continued insistence that their story continue to be told resonates with the rest of the country. And I think for those of you who are following that issue, you will see that it somehow is, when you actually have Washington starting to listen, because these kids are not going away, and they're accomplishing something that the adults have not since 2012. The fact that they're actually saying, people aren't listening to us unless we scream, really resonated with me. In Bristol, 21% of our population is under the age of 18, yet they don't really have a voice in what they say and what they do in terms of their education budget, Parks and Rec, why the Page Park Pool in Bristol is losing 300,000 gallons of water every summer, which means it's closed on several days. They have no voice. Our boards and commissions stipulate that if you are to have a vote, you have to be 18 to serve. So what do we do with all of this unleashed potential of people who are growing up here, but at some point realize they may not want to stay here? Are there jobs? Are there activities? The classic, what do kids do on the weekends? What are we providing for them? Why is there nothing to do for kids between the ages of 12 and 18? Legal, shall we say. So, where is their voice, and where is their seat at the table? And what does that table look like? Is it just, school functions? Is it student council? Where do they go from there? And I think that's what motivated me to really think about, in a legitimate, substantive way, how can youth be involved in the city of Bristol to benefit all of us? And I'll be honest with you, I thought that I was, having this great moment of clarity and that this was going to be a great model program. And then when I started doing research, I realized that the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, they've been championing this issue for decades. But unfortunately, it never really has caught on because there's a disconnect. And one of the things that I think we're doing differently in Bristol, which I think is going to help, is the creation of adult allies. And that means putting people at the table with these young people who actually care about what they have to say and are willing to listen, not because it makes us look good to have a youth cabinet, but because it's important. Because these are the kids who are going to make or break our community in the next 15 to 20 years. So with that being said, when I was running for office last summer, I did convene what we called our backyard cabinet, a group of young people ranging in ages from 10, and a few of them were in college, who got together occasionally to talk to me about what they thought was either right or wrong with Bristol. And it was amazing. And I will admit that in the beginning, I wasn't quite sure where that was going to go either. But some of their issues were really interesting, and from their perspective were things that I never really thought about. One that I'll just quickly mention was it really significantly bothers the kids in our public school system that we signed up for what is called a federal food safety lunch nutrition program. I'm not sure what the acronym is, but it's the one that removed French fries and pizza and soda and anything else that they actually liked at lunch. And I don't drink soda, and I don't let my kids drink soda, but I can see where if you're actually removing food that kids actually enjoyed eating, our budget got a boost. We got $300,000. Yet the actual amount of users in the lunch program fell off tremendously. And not only that, it's the program, if some of you recall, where you get told what goes on your tray, whether you're going to eat it or not. And at the end of the day, fruit, vegetables, portions of things that nobody wanted to eat are going in the trash. And that really, really bothers kids. There's no reclamation point. There's no thank you, I'm not going to eat that, I can't eat that, I'm not interested in that. It just gets loaded on your tray. And so we talked about that, and there was actually some ideas that went forward, and they actually put a proposal in to the Board of Ed. And so there is actually some consideration given as to what that cost benefit is for the city of Bristol. Now that's all great, but what was even more amazing is the look on their faces when at the end of September we said to them, oh, they sent this to committee and they're probably going to act on this as part of the budget process. The kids were incredulous because unfortunately they didn't think it was going to go anywhere. They really just thought it was an exercise in them coming to these meetings and talking about things almost like an assignment, which at the end of the day was not going to have any real result. And that really got me thinking about the role of the adult ally and what we do to actually let kids know that their voice needs to be heard. When I was younger, I went to a lot of city meetings. It was a great way to get out of the house. My mom was the type who said no to everything. My dad was the type who said yes to everything. So clearly there was benefit to having a little bit of freedom. But I did realize that, when I was even as young as 10 or 11 going to meetings, a lot of the people at the meetings thought it was really cute. Oh, it's so cute that you come to meetings, and I'd get the proverbial pat on the shoulder, and it was fun. It was fun to have, Mike's daughter come to meetings. Isn't that really cute that she's involved in government? But as I got older, I realized that they still thought it was cute, and they didn't think that any of my opinions really mattered. So I could say something about something, and I would get the, yeah, and then they would just turn and talk to somebody else. And that really bothered me. At that point, I had probably logged more hours at City Council and Board of Finance meetings than some of the people serving. And I realized that some of them were there to create resumes, to make sure that their obituaries more than 2 columns when they died, and that, in effect, they were what I called packet rippers, which are the worst type of citizen participants, which means they're just there for the placard in front of their desk, and as they're coming into a meeting, they're opening their packet and looking at their agenda for the very first time. No preparation, because it's all in fun games. They're really just there because it was a cool group to be in. There's a little bit of stature and there's a little bit of prestige. And that is the point where engagement collides with personal interests. And if you're not there for the right reasons, even if you're a volunteer, it doesn't mean that you should be in that seat. And that's something that I've really struggled with over the last 4 months since I've taken office. There are some really good people involved in city government. Some of them are in the wrong seats on the bus. And having to make those moves to ensure that all of our boards, especially those who have regulatory authority, like such as land use boards, have the right people to make the right decisions for the betterment of Bristol and to avoid litigation and liability has been a really big challenge. One of the other issues that has actually just popped up, and it's kind of connected to my opening statement, is a recent policy issue that's popped up. And when we started the youth cabinet, it's one of those things where adults now use Facebook, but kids don't. So we were struggling with how to connect with kids about how to get them to the meetings. So I gave out my cell phone to a lot of people, especially during the campaign. And last week, I got a text from an unknown number, and she said, turned out to be a girl from our backyard cabinet, and she said, they're not gonna let us walk out on March 14th. Can you help? And I thought to myself, every school system across the country is letting their high school kids walk out on March 14th to show solidarity with this issue. Bristol is now talking about not letting that happen from a liability standpoint. And so I felt really good that this girl felt comfortable enough to text me and say, what are we gonna do? And so we negotiated somewhat of a compromise where I think they're going to be able to walk out, but they're gonna be within the school property. They're not gonna let them cross roads, they're not gonna let them just scatter. And then the compromise with the students was, you need to come back in, and there's a planned program to talk about school violence and school safety. But to me, that was one of those issues where sometimes the adult allies don't play the correct role, because that's really something that these kids felt strongly about. They wanted to participate, and being told they couldn't really didn't resonate with them without having a discussion about it. I think that the backlash from the 2016 election has been a big piece of youth involvement. I think the Think Global, Act Local definitely benefited me. I would come into headquarters last year, and keep in mind that that was my 9th election, and I had won just as many as I had lost. So this was actually going to get me past 500 if I actually won this election. So I was working pretty hard at it. And I would walk into headquarters some nights, and there would be people there besides our core group that I didn't know. And so obviously good manners says that you go up to those people and you say hello and thank them for coming to headquarters. And inevitably there'd be people with children ranging in age from 6 to 16. And we would introduce ourselves, any candidate that happened to come in after going door to door. And I'd say, hi, I'm Ellen, thanks for coming down. And more times than not, the mother or father would turn to me and say, hi, I'm so-and-so, but I'm here because my daughter, my son, they wanted to come down and help. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. But I also think it's related to the fact that kids feel helpless. And on a local level, they're able to connect. They know somebody. They know that I'm Carson's mom, or they remembered me from Bingham School, or I talked to them at a Little League game, or I used to serve at the concession stand at Bristol Eastern. And there was a connection there. And they felt more comfortable saying, I want to get involved, and I'm going to help her, because they knew me. So from a local level, I started to see a little bit of a glimmer of hope, that actually kids were self-starting. They were asking their parents to come to headquarters. I can't even get people who are on the Democratic Town Committee to come to headquarters on most nights. And I had a 6-year-old yelling at me because I'd run out of stamps and she wasn't done with her postcards. It was a great thing, and I was pretty happy about it. So I started thinking about how do we capture that? And from there, we did talk about, we had specific activities for them, and the numbers continued to grow. And again, when you're running a campaign, you're so busy with things that you sometimes don't see the big picture. So the kids kept coming, the numbers kept growing, new people kept coming, new faces were there. And again, for any of you who have ever been involved with politics, especially on the local level, you usually just get the same group of people. And so this was a huge thing. So everybody started taking notice of it, but again, big picture. We're all running around trying to, do as much as we can within the small amount of time that we had as November was approaching. So I didn't really actually realize the effect that we were having on kids. But then on election night, we all knew. We went to headquarters first. Our party was someplace else, and we realized about 8:15 that not only had I won, but most of the council had won as well. And the one council member candidate who didn't win had come in third, barely, almost got elected, and she had barely campaigned. She was a new mom. She was working full-time, and for her to have come that close against the next person who finished fourth, who was extremely well known in the community, was still a victory for all of us. So we kind of took a moment to think about, oh my gosh, we just swept all the seats except one, including taking out 2 incumbents. So we made our way over to where the party was. And it was the same place that the party had been in 2015, which had not been much of a party. That year, I lost the same race to the same candidate by 100 votes. And when you contrast losing by 100 votes and winning by 3,000 votes, you start to figure out what some of those different dynamics were. And as I walked in, and you're looking at this sea of people, just hundreds of people that had crammed into the Polish Club for election night, kind of sensing that something quite possibly could change in Democratic bloc, because we hadn't been having a good stretch. I looked, and right in the beginning, as you walked into this large hall, there are all these people there. And normally when you walk in, just like at headquarters, you know everybody in the room. Well, I walk in, and I'm looking around, and yes, there were the sea of familiar, supportive faces who had given so much time and energy to us. But there were also all these people I didn't know. But there were people who also had their kids with them on a school night, and it was already almost 9 o'clock. And most of them were young girls. And parents had actually brought their kids because they sensed that it could possibly be a historic night for Bristol. And it was then that I realized that the impact we were having on youth, especially young girls, was something that we had to harness. And that's why we transitioned the backyard cabinet into the youth cabinet. I really felt strongly that we needed to create a structure so that the young people in town, no matter how old they were, although I did cut it off at 10, you have to be 10 to participate, which means you're in middle school. And anybody can come, and we do have high school kids, but it's about years 10 to 18 are the participants. I wanted them to know that they were important, that despite sometimes being treated by older people that their opinion didn't count, that it did count at City Hall. And that the lack of intergenerational responsibility with some of our older citizens who feel like they've had theirs, they use the parks, their kids are done with the schools, they don't want to pay for that anymore, was not the right attitude for Bristol. And so the youth cabinet was born, and we had a couple of sessions already, and I will tell you that the amount of people who are coming because they're hungry, because they want to be a part of something, and not because their parents are making them. It just keeps doubling. So what we started to do is, the struggle obviously is keeping it age appropriate. So whether you're 10 or whether you're 18, we need to kind of cross it across department lines so people find value. So we've been identifying one department per month, and these youth cabinet meetings happen before the city council meeting every month, so they then have the opportunity to stay if they want to. Nutmeg Cable has started to film them, so they're going to be shown on cable TV. Our first one hasn't aired yet, and our next one is next Tuesday night. So the first one that we taped was with the Registrar of Voters, and the kids actually had to go through the entire process of setting up the electronic tabulators and doing all the checks and everything that goes into getting that one machine ready to go to a voting place for election day. Have to admit, I didn't quite understand all those steps myself, and it was fascinating to see the looks on their faces, because not only haven't voted themselves, but even if they have accompanied their parent, all they do is go in and they scan the form. But there's about 22 steps that happen before that. So that was a great program, and they were able to go home and they talk about it. Their parents had no idea either. Next session is with the police department, where they get a tour of that. We're also, in April, taking them downstairs to the public works department, and they're going to be given a site plan, and they're going to be able to draw in, using all the appropriate land use regulations, what they want to happen in the 17 empty acres across the street from City Hall. That used to be the center mall. And then they're going to the fire department in May. And in June, I think they're going to help us put on our first concert of the summer concert series. So really, these are all substantive things. And the more important thing is they have to take this information and then they have to do something with it. So after every session, one of them decides that they feel that they have enough, and they come to the city council meeting and they talk at public participation on behalf of the youth cabinet and say what they've done that day. It's quick. Usually it's about 30 seconds or a minute, but again, it's some additional exposure. Now, the other piece that we're trying to do is how to get them involved on boards and commissions. The Bristol Board of Education actually enacted a policy a few years ago where they have student representatives from Bristol Eastern and Bristol Central who sit on the board, and that has been a great success. In fact, last year, those student representatives enacted a policy change by saying that the midterm schedule in Bristol was too stressful, too compacted, and it wasn't allowing them full opportunity to study based on how it was scheduled. And the board actually reacted to that and changed the policy and made the midterms half days in Bristol over a certain number of days. Again, a small success, but one that shows when there's appropriate adult allies who aren't doing it simply for show, that good things can happen. There's also the power of priorities, and I think that young people underestimate their voice when talking about things that are important. And I wrote down some of them because when we talk in youth cabinet, they don't understand a lot of times how policies directly impact them. So we've talked about sports. If any of you are from Bristol, you might be aware that a few years ago, due to budget cuts, they eliminated middle school sports. Now, you and I both know that there's a lot of kids who only go to school because of the opportunity to play sports, and that's their connection in. And if they don't have that connection in, there's a least likely amount of time that they're going to spend there, if possible. So that was one that we've talked about. The summer concerts. The park board actually had a huge issue a couple of months ago when looking at the schedule, because we actually introduced a rap type band. Now, if any of you have been to Rockwell Park, you'll know that the majority of our park users there, because of the skate park and because of the basketball courts, are urban users. But the summer concert series attracts an older demographic over in the amphitheater. So we thought, well, we should really be doing music that attracts everybody. Well, that didn't go over so well with the concert goers, and so now we have to do some moving around the schedule, but we are not having a rap concert. There will be one, but now we're going to do it in a way that there's maybe 2 concerts at different parts of town, so people have a choice. But again, who are the older people to say, no, that shouldn't be on the summer concert series? Well, I'll tell you why they are, because they're the ones who come to the meetings and the concerts, and the younger kids don't. So again, that piece of involvement and having them have that proverbial seat at the table is really important. We talked about the lunches. One of the best policy discussions that really illustrates to me having people involved that don't get the big picture. Are any of you familiar with one of our public housing projects known as Davis Drive, known as Cambridge Park specifically? Well, Cambridge Park sits on Jerome Avenue, And parallel to that is Bick Street, where the Little League complex is. They back up to each other, but there's some wetlands that separate it, and so there's a fence, and obviously it's a marsh in some spots. So the kids who live in Cambridge Park need to come out of Cambridge Park and walk 0.87 miles around a block to come into Edgewood School. Now, there's been talk of why don't we just put a bridge over the marsh, because that would really improve the opportunity for kids to get to school on time. I don't like to characterize public housing projects with socioeconomic status, but a lot of those families there are single family, they work 2 jobs. They're there because of a cycle of poor decisions, whether it's a credit decision or it's a personal relationship, hooked up with the wrong person, that type of thing. But their kids want to go to school. And so why are we, as a government, not putting in a bridge which would solve 85% of the problems there? It's too expensive. So you know what we do now in the winter? We pay for a bus. It doesn't make any sense when a bridge would be so much easier and a more permanent issue. And the kids don't get it either, because here they are walking all the way around when all they'd have to do is walk out their back doors and cross the bridge. And here's the kicker. We have bridges at other schools, but they're not public housing projects. You can draw your own conclusions. Class sizes. You know, I hear it from parents all the time. There's 26 kids in my son's class. There's 26 kids in my daughter's class. Isn't that the cap? Yeah, it is. But with a Board of Education budget that has been cut tremendously by every administration prior to mine, that's what you get. You can't have it both ways. You can't have low taxes and quality education. So the adults don't seem to make that connection, but the kids do. They know. You know, Carson throws his desk in class twice a week, one kid said to me. Who's throwing desks in classes? Apparently there are kids. We don't have enough paras. So again, you get what you pay for, but no parent likes to hear that. And then there's the mental behavioral health aspect. Things have changed since our parents and grandparents went to school. And we need to have more mental health and behavioral specialists in classrooms. But nobody wants to hear that either, because that increases the budget as well. But going back to my original statement, if we want to service families and all of their service needs, it starts in the schools, and it helps to have parents involved. But everybody has to do their part. And when we know of situations and we're not addressing them, then we're just as guilty. We may not be pulling the trigger, but we're contributing. Tomorrow's shooters are today's students. And I think that when we finally have that chilling thought resonate with us, we need to understand that it's all of our responsibilities, not to cast aspersions on parents or wonder why, from a stigma standpoint, that family's not doing enough to help their kid. Let's peel it back and figure out what is going on with that family and what those resources are in order to address them. Because you help that one kid, you help that entire classroom. So basically, youth issues are community issues, but they've not had the voice. But it impacts all of us. And a healthy community is one in which everybody feels as if they're connected. So, you know, it's the rap music, it's the basketball courts, it's the skate park. The older people in town will say to me, oh, I don't go to Rockwell Park anymore, because they don't like the basketball courts, they don't like the skate park, they don't like the noise. Well, you know what? My answer to them is find another park, because parks are for everybody. And if that particular park is not fitting your needs, then you can go someplace else, because we have 785 acres of parks, and that's where you need to go. They don't like that answer too much, but it's one that we have to start having, because not everybody is in the driver's seat from one generation. Everybody gets a say on how these parks, for example, work. I think that another example is that, you know, youth definitely suffers when government limits their options. So how many of you have heard, and I guess it's true of other towns as well, but Bristol's a sports town. We're a sports town. We love our sports. We have a Sports Hall of Fame. We have another organization that honors recipients as well, the Tramps. We have all these things going on. We have Muzzy Field, but yet we cut middle school sports. Yet we don't have enough assistant coaches because that budget's been cut. And in 1999, we, the community, paid $1.2 million for 17 acres known as the Roberts property on James P. Casey Road for active recreation to be developed as fields and a little sports complex with synthetic fields, outdoor fields, a walking track connected into the Hoppers Burge Pond Nature Center, a playground. It was going to be this great facility. And it was in our plan of development that in that neighborhood, we had not enough park and recreation opportunities for what was our largest growing neighborhood. So that was 2001, and here we are in 2018, and that $1.2 million taxpayer investment still sits empty as one of the most expensive dog parks in the state of Connecticut. Because one neighborhood said, we don't want lights shining in our backyards. And they did that at the last public hearing after a 6-year study of the Roberts property with architects, with plans, with lots of meetings. And in 2007, they all showed up and said, wait, what are you doing? But meanwhile, at the 6 years worth of meetings, we had kids, we had a growing lacrosse program looking for fields, we had little leagues looking for practice fields, and the kids came. They came with their parents because their parents were invested. They were the ones running these volunteer organizations. And instead, it became a political football, no sports pun intended, and it lies fallow to this day. You know, it's one of those policy discussions that really makes you think about, why would you even bother spending $1.2 million on a piece of property if you're not going to use it? But here we are today, and it's not being used. And those are the decisions that I think kids look at, even in a very innocent way, every time they drive by that property and say, what is that? Why is that there? And why aren't we doing anything with it? It sits across the street from our middle school that doesn't have enough fields. But the dogs are happy, so we're good. I think local government needs to be accessible to all citizens, whether they're disabled and can watch council meetings on TV, through social media, through opportunities like the youth cabinet. It doesn't really matter who you are, you have to feel that no matter what your age, your race, your religion, that there is somebody at City Hall who's going to listen to your issues. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to agree with all of them. Believe me, there are some moments that if Candid Camera was in my office, they would capture some really interesting conversations that I'm not even sure where they come from sometimes. But still, everybody has the right to come in and say, this is what I think. And I think what's going to happen as a community is when people stop doing that is when you start to see a community atrophy. And just, you know, through complete indifference is when things start to go bad. I hope that we're not at that point, and I see glimmers of hope with our youth cabinet that these kids are coming of their own volition. They're coming because they feel connected. They're coming because when we walk into a department for whatever that topic is that night, they're greeted with respect and dignity and asked to participate and ask their opinions. And I feel that as an elected official, that's part of my job. And that I hope that everybody realizes that works with us in City Hall, that it's their job as well. We made a decision last week that we're going to bring back our mock elections. When I was in high school, you could run for office. And then what would happen is if you won, no matter what you were, whether you ran for mayor or city council, treasurer, or a department head, which was also on the ballot, you would then come to City Hall and you would shadow that person that you had won the position for the afternoon, and then you would come to a city council meeting and sit alongside, whether it was on the dais or in the audience with the department head, and be that person for that day to kind of get another glimpse of what that is. So we have brought that back. It's going to be in October of this year. I think we're starting with St. Paul, which is the smallest of the 3 high schools in Bristol, so that we can kind of run through it with a smaller group and work out any bugs, and then it'll go to Eastern and Central in subsequent years. And again, just another way to, for a very small cost, get people involved in coming to City Hall and realizing that it is actually their government, not just their parents' government or their neighbor's government or their teacher's government, but it's their government as well. I think that the most important thing is to also understand that why they think that their role hasn't been important. They think their voice would not be heard. They lack transportation to become involved. It's difficult for them to balance like a part-time job, their family, and other time commitments. General lack of parental support if they want to do something like this. Activities are held at inconvenient times. The issues that the adults want them to tackle are not of interest to them. whereas they'd like to do something else, and that's not of interest to the adults. No other youth are doing it. So we have that stigma piece. You know, I'm gonna look like I'm a nerd, I'm a geek if I go and do this, and someone's gonna make fun of me. Well, that's not the right approach to take either. And then the most important one, why they're not involved when asked, it's because nobody asked them. So that's gonna be the change that we see, and it's one that I hope will actually ignite and let them know that government is for them as well. So I'm happy to take questions, but all of that.
I think we just got a taste of why the mayor won last year's election by more than 3,000 votes. Very good. Thank you for that. Excellent.
2,735.
Yes, we would like to open it up to some questions. We have about 15 minutes or so, or comments.
So I've lived in Bristol my whole life. When you talk about the biggest problems of Bristol, you didn't mention the one that I see as the biggest, which is the urban blight. Bristol's a pit, honestly. It's the center. Well, it's true. I've lived there my entire life. It's pretty not great. The center mall's been empty for most of my life.
13 years.
Yeah. And it doesn't seem like they want to put anything there that would benefit Bristol at all.
Okay, so two issues, downtown and code enforcement. So I live on Federal Hill, which is a historic neighborhood, but it's also a very dense neighborhood. So I could reach out my kitchen window, and if my neighbor reached out her kitchen window, we could do the proverbial exchange of sugar pretty easily. I live on a street where there's a 3-family across the street from my single family, 2 houses up, there's one of the Barnes family mansions, there's a store where they sell expired food, there's a little cafe, Parkside Cafe, which is great, and then there's, as my kids call it, well, I won't say what my kids call it, they say we live in the hood. And so there were times when they were at Bingham School that creating play dates, when you said, well, just come up Summer Street and take a left, people were like, we're good, you live off Summer Street, you know, code enforcement, which is how we handle blight, is critical, and we've not done a good job. So the property maintenance ordinance that I passed in my last term on the city council started to address that, which meant you can't decide to park cars on your front lawn, you can't decide to create you know, attic apartments or cellar apartments, you can't do any of that. We're gonna come in and we're gonna regulate, and it's been a battle. There have been improvements. Federal Hill is a big target, Park Street, Divinity Street in the West End, where this huge amount of housing occurs, have been the areas. And we've taken down probably almost 100 buildings through condemnation. Reducing housing density is going to improve housing quality, but it's not a sexy topic. Nobody really wants to talk about it, but that code enforcement committee, which is comprised of all enforcement officials, we're actually meeting Wednesday morning, fire marshal, building, zoning, the public works comes, solid waste, everybody comes around the table. And here's the interesting thing that happened in 2001 when we started noticing changes in our neighborhood because of investor landlords coming up from New York, not owner occupied, but Bristol had a stable mill rate. We were a good investment. You got a lot of housing for your housing buck, because in World War II, after World War II, a ton of housing was created because of our industrial factories and all the jobs that were created. So we have this huge amount of housing, and nobody's living in them, and nobody's taking care of them. It's not that proverbial thing where relatives were coming over and living with their families, you know, as they all immigrated from Europe anymore. So there's a balance too. There's life safety, and then there's what do we do with these families who we cannot condone living in these apartments that are not safe. That's a problem too. So you relocate them. We've spent over $550,000 in the last several years relocating people out of apartments that aren't safe, because everybody deserves to live in a safe and sanitary apartment. And believe me, there are people that are not in Bristol. I walked into one apartment years ago, and she said, oh, be careful. And I looked down, and there was a hole this big outside of her bathroom door. She had young children. And if you look down, you could see, you know, whatever those are. What are those called, John? Joists? Whatever. Into the next apartment below her. So she was getting her toddler out of the bathtub every night, and they were jumping over a hole. You know, but some people, whether they're undocumented or in minimum wage jobs, they don't think they qualify for anything better than that. And that's a problem. Code enforcement's ongoing. Downtown is a problem because of politics. And that's all it is. I mean, we had a great plan, and the older people came out and said, we're not paying for that.
Which plan was the great plan?
The one that, well, there was a few.
Because
There was a few. The Renaissance plan, which had a combination of retail and housing, was one that everybody liked, but retail has changed. And so that made people nervous, and everybody thought housing was Section 8 housing. Housing, not all housing is Section 8 housing. Not that there's anything wrong with Section 8 housing. There's also workforce housing. There's housing for people that, you know, are empty nesters. There's a lot of opportunities, and the people that work at ESPN, which is our ideal, everybody wants to do everything for ESPN in our town because they're a major employer. Those people don't make a lot of money when you start working at ESPN. They would qualify for workforce housing because of their salaries, but nobody could differentiate. So that plan went away because they needed some investment from the city. So we, in our infinite wisdom, said, oh, no. You can invest $10 million in our downtown with your plan, but we're not going to invest anything. If you want to come here, it's all on you. We end up putting in a $4 million road 2 years later, which I'm still not sure what that's about. Any of you have been downtown. But we're putting in a $4 million road. And we spent $25,000 on putting a patch of grass on the corner to make it look like we had green space. I wasn't on the council during that time.
I have a follow-up question related to that. Cities don't exist in a vacuum. And so to the extent that there's urban blight in cities like Bristol or Britain, Hartford, whatever, to what extent are you relying upon the state and the federal government for assistance, and to what extent is that not happening?
So for this budget cycle, I'm pretending that the state of Connecticut doesn't exist, and that they're not going to give me a dime, because I think that's the better way to approach budgeting. I will tell you that there was a huge moment of panic last December when President Trump announced that he was eliminating the Community Development Block Grant Program. We get hundreds of thousands of dollars into Bristol specifically for housing rehabilitation, for social service projects that come through, and in terms they're called block grants. So without that money, we would not be able to give contributions to some of the social service agencies that do great work, homeless, domestic violence, soup kitchens, because that's what that money is intended for, people who are living below the poverty line. We also take that money for housing rehabilitation to help people who are owner-occupied that want to do something with their three-family. Maybe they're older, maybe they're now on fixed incomes, maybe they've had a catastrophic event, a furnace goes, a roof fails. We have money for people who are income eligible that we can help them stay in their homes. And we also do projects for nonprofits. So the Historical Society, for example, got ADA doors and some other types of small grants in order to do those projects. So all of that was scheduled to go away with the HUD cuts. And so luckily that has been restored, so we are going to have that. But it's a very difficult time for all budgets. And I think that, you know, people will always ask me at the grocery store, are we going to have a tax increase? I don't know. I don't know if we are or we aren't. But I will tell you that it's irresponsible to not look at how to deliver essential services and what that's going to cost. We have a very bad habit in Bristol of saying to all of our department heads, keep your increases this year to 2%. But contractually, everybody gets raises because they're all in unions, and then you have cost of living, and you have just regular things like fuel. Fuel goes up, you know, electric bills. So how can you tell someone responsibly, oh, you got to stick to 2%, when the police last year got a 2.2% raise? So already you're over that. So what happens is the sleight of hand with budgeting that doesn't benefit anybody in the long run. So you put in your budget and then you say, oh, 0% tax increase, aren't I the best politician ever? But then over the course of the next 12 months, every municipality carries what's called a contingency account. You know, what happens if there's 1,000 inches of snow? What happens if a school roof goes? So you have this money that you hope you don't use. So what happens in Bristol is everybody goes to the contingency fund. Well, they didn't give me this in the budget because they needed a zero tax increase. But now it's September and I'm going to go ask for that $45,000 piece of equipment. And they get it. So it doesn't make sense because now it's going back to that budget, but it's not transparent because it's not within what they said what they needed. So that also contributes to people's skepticism about government. You know, do you really believe them when they tell you anymore? And so You know, budgeting is probably the worst part of the job in terms of trying to see what does it actually cost to run government, where are the bodies buried, because you know every department head is going to try to put money away somewhere for emergencies because they're hoarding it, because in the past few years they've been told you can't have what you need. You can't have what you need to run your department. So maybe there's a position that's been vacant that they know they don't need, but they're still going to carry it on the budget because that salary line item could be transferred to do something else come October or December.
Other questions or comments?
I have a question about what's going on with the mental health issue, the cutting of funds, the lack of, things are getting very tight there. They talk about the number calling 211, which I feel is very, it does not do much. So basically people are in there and some of them are coming up and are let go on the street without a plan or anything. It's very diluted. I was just wondering what the thoughts were about the funds that are being cut for dealing with mental health facilities and people.
So we have a couple of different areas. We do have some healthcare facilities which have been very good about coming to the table and helping. We also have some homeless issues, people who have mental health issues that refuse to adhere to the rules. So you see a lot of people who are now on the streets because they're not following the rules. They won't stay off, you know, they won't stay on their meds, I guess. Those are the panhandlers you see, that type of thing. We also have the opioid issue, which is definitely impacting mental health services. And our task force is actually starting next week in terms of, we have providers, people in recovery, and everybody that's trying to deal with that. And mental health is a central piece of that as well.
I just wanted to share because I had hands-on experience, so and things are very bad with that. It's just, you know.
We've heard the stories about 211. Bristol Hospital just expanded some of their behavioral health opportunities. Willer Clinic has stepped up. Community Health Centers has been in my office. Everybody recognizes it, and that's why the task force, I think, is going to be important, because one thing that we don't do well is have everybody sit around the table and share what their resources are and how to connect when they're needed. So I'm hoping that that's at least a starting point. How are we doing on time?
We're about 5 minutes out from the next class, is that right? Yeah. So maybe one more quick question?
Yeah, I'm just curious how many people are on your youth council right now?
We did have a little bit of sports interruptions, but for the most part, it's about 24 people, ranging in ages from 10 to 18.
And as far as kind of keeping this momentum going, how are you encouraging kids to kind of like recruit, for lack of a better word, the younger generation?
We do announcements in the middle schools, and we also have some of the civics and history teachers talking about it, and we're hoping that next year, if they participate, they'll be given some kind of credit, but there's a whole process to go through that in order for the Board of Education to approve that, so that isn't happening this year, but we're hoping it'll happen next year.
I have a follow-up question to that. Hi, I'm not replacing, but I was wondering, how many of those kids are in the special ed program or are speaking out against with the special ed program or special needs kids on the board?
There's a couple, and they definitely have opinions about things.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the areas that has the most impact in schools, and my husband's a school resource officer, and I can tell you that 70% of his time is spent in those arenas because they have such large needs and there's not enough resources being concentrated in those programs.
And what is the Board of Ed and you guys doing to give more money towards the special ed programs because they are not well-funded?
Here's some breaking news from my friends from the Bristol Press. I believe that the Board of Education, who is scheduled to present half of their budget tonight, and then they have another budget hearing next week, has actually retooled from their original draft presentation to add more resources for special ed, behavioral health, and a lot of these other issues. We only have a handful of behavior intervention specialists in the Bristol school system. I think we need to double that. We need to spend more money on psychologists and social workers, and that, I think, is going to be reflected in their budget. And then it's on us to make sure that they get those resources.
Thank you.
And real quickly, as we wrap up here, the 10 to 18, I commend you getting the voices. We have faculty, staff, and 2 students left because you saw quite a few get ready for the next class. How do we tell our students, 18 and above, how do they get involved? How is their voice heard as well?
Actually, I'm glad you said that because I meant to mention it and I didn't. If you are 18 and you are a resident of any town, not just Bristol, you are eligible to serve on a board or commission. So you should immediately contact your mayor, your first selectman, send a resume and say, I'm ready to get involved. All you have to do is be a registered voter, and you could serve in any area that interests you. In Bristol, let's just say you have an engineering bent. We have a public works department that has a board that governs policy. We have youth and community services. We have a parks board. We have a Bristol Development Authority. Economic development is huge. It's this generation who's going to be back here looking for jobs and hopefully buying homes and settling here. Get on and start talking about what companies you want us to give economic development grants to, because that's where you're going to be spending your dollars. So it's not just Bristol. Every single town in this area has boards and commissions that are fueled by the energy of individuals serving in a volunteer capacity.
On that note, I think we have to. Before the mayor goes, I would like to have Bob Brown, Professor Bob Brown, present her with a check for a school that is in need, Bristol. This is sponsored by the Civic Engagement Institute. Mr. Brown is part of the advisory board.
It's the school that doesn't have a bridge over the wetland.
So Bob.
I wish I could buy a bridge for $300.
I have to say, I've known Ellen I knew her before she was Ellen Zoppo-Sassu. And I covered her and I reported on her and editorialized about her through the years.
And sometimes not so kindly.
Yeah, but usually kindly.
Most of the time.
Voted for her every chance I could, and actually did a little work on her campaigns. So,
Yes.
in any event, I was driving down Route 6 in Bristol the other day. Saw a bumper sticker that I think had to have gone up right after the last election, the one that you didn't win for mayor, and it said, "Don't blame me, Bristol. I voted for Alan." So, in any event, we do have here a check, a big check for $300 to support the Mountain View School going into their activity account, and believe me, Mountain View can use it. So.